Uchasanev, and welcome to the Ra'ama Hetepa Men podcast show. In this podcast, we'll explore the Ma'asah philosophy, the age of Aquarius consciousness, culture, and the restoration of your spiritual authority in your everyday life. Today's topic is vitality of self, utilizing pleasure to increase your power and success in life. You know, it's funny communicating or talking about the concept of vitality and vigor because it's not something that has been ingrained in our consciousness for the last 2,000 years. The understanding and concept of vitality is something that has completely been hidden from us. And the reason why that is necessary is because one of the ways that you can render people perpetually dependent, we're in a state of perpetual servitude, and therefore dependent completely upon the system and dependent upon others, and thus very susceptible to racism. The way you can keep that system going is by ensuring that the vitality and vigor of the people are maintained at a certain low level to keep them in a perpetual state of servitude. So there are certain things that just simply were not taught to us. So for the past 2,000 years, we haven't taken into consideration the importance of vitality and vigor. We have no understanding of it. We think that vitality and vigor is just something that you, as you're young, you're born into. You're right. As a young person, you have vitality and vigor, and then as you're old, it goes away. You don't quantify things that you can do to increase your vitality and vigor. You don't understand that staying in shape is equated to vitality and vigor. And so through time, you start to lose connection to these practices. And then what happens is generations after generation, you'll find that they're starting to get sicker and sicker, weaker and weaker, more prone to disease and illness, and so on and so on. So since this knowledge was not provided or passed down, it wasn't a part of the spiritual tradition. It wasn't a part of the traditions of the Occidental conquering cultures. You find that generation through generation, each generation becomes weaker, sicker, prone to disease, and thus becomes more docile and dependent upon the system. One of the things that I appreciate growing up in the South, you know, I grew up in a huge orange grove, and neighboring to an orange grove, so to speak. And I remember a time where those particular farms, if you will, were dependent upon African American or Black labor, whichever one you identify with. And so it wasn't nothing for us to, if you needed a job, you know, those jobs were not W-9 jobs or W-2 jobs. If you needed a job, you showed up, you talked to the foreman, and if he had room, he'd let you work for that day. And you would work by picking oranges and, and by sacks, right? You had the sack across your back or whatever. And then you would go to dump it, and they would count how many bags you picked, and that's how you got paid. And so you made, at that time, it's probably only about $20-$30 a day, so to speak. But anyway, you know, if you wanted to go in there, even work for a day, make some money to use the next day, that's what you had to do. But anyway, I grew up in the South, so, those jobs were what we call seasonal jobs. So therefore, people from the North, like Blacks from North Carolina and South Carolina, would come down to Florida to work these jobs for the summer and then go back up, earn their money, and then go back up to South Carolina. So they call them seasons. So a lot of people would come down on the seasons. One of the things that I appreciated about this is that the vitality and vigor of the adults there. You know, you had some of these adults that were there in their late 50s, late 60s, still working, still picking oranges. And from the neck up, you knew that they were of age, but from the neck down, they looked like they were in their 20s. And I really appreciated seeing that, because you appreciate the power of vitality and vigor. Now, mind you, most of these people that worked in these places were alcoholics. And so, they were doing things to undermine their vitality. But the fact that they were working in an orange grove at even later ages in life, they were still able to sustain themselves through working in that field. And that's a sign of vitality and vigor. So reason why I'm bringing all that up was it showed me, and by the way, you had men during that time that were in their, 60s, 70s, still fathering children. So testosterone was high because they had huge muscle mass because they were still able to do manual labor. And so on and so on. They were able to work for themselves. So what that showed me is it gave me a instant view, if you will, of what vitality and vigor meant as you age. So our generation after generation is becoming sicker, becoming weaker, becoming more docile, becoming more dependent upon the system. And that's manifesting in their behavior. So Generation Z, for instance, which is the youngest generation right now that we're identifying with, right? They are suffering the worst. For instance, they have a 300% increase in cancer, 50% increase in suicide. Close to 70% of them have stated that they suffer from anxiety and depression disorders. And what I'm saying is that all these things are simply an expression of low vitality. So why do we find that Generation Z is in this state? Another stat is Generation Z, they're college educated, they're able to get a job, but they struggle with keeping a job. They struggle with maintaining employment. All right, and so a lot of parents are complaining about that because they're able to go out and get jobs, but they're unable to sustain and maintain them. At the same time, Generation Z is the social media generation, the video game generation. As they interact and get fed information through the algorithm. But as we are seeing now, they are the foundational concepts, the pedestals of success, the pedestal that you would define as a successful person, they are struggling in. Why? Because their vitality is low. Why is their vitality low? Because their application of pleasure is incorrect. The age of Aquarius, right, is the consciousness that is manifesting in the world right now, that is manifesting through the young people, that is functioning outside of the realms of the mechanisms of control of the standards that have been set through Christianity and Islam. As a matter of fact, it is through your religious paradigm that you define what a man is, what a woman is, how a woman should live, how a man should live, how a man and woman should live to be in God's good grace, follow these commandments. God said that a woman should dress like this. God said that a man should function like this, and so on and so on. The age of Aquarius kids are functioning outside of those boundaries now. See, in the mechanism of control, you need these boundaries because the consciousness that are functioning for the last 2,000 years needs to be managed and controlled. So that's why you'll never hear me say that anything negative as far as there are good or bad religions out there, because they're necessary. But as this new generation is growing beyond these boundaries, as the Bible says, I guess, the hedge has been removed. They are being inundated with pleasure, things that stimulate pleasure, sexual explicit images, sexual explicit activities, consumption practices that are not based upon increasing health and vitality, but are based upon providing you with avenues of pleasure that have not been scrutinized according to the needs and demands of vitality. So the algorithm is reprogramming itself to support that particular subscriber, and therefore continuously feeding it those toxic images and influences. In our current society, right, inappropriate sexual activity is being projected through all avenues, right? So music, entertainment, and now in certain cases, school is bombarding the young people with these expressions of pleasure. And through their expression of pleasure, through their consumption practices in the name of pleasure, they are devitalizing themselves. That's why they are said to be the sickest and probably going to be the age population that's going to have the lowest life expectancy. So that's where we are. So now, why are we in this state? Well, the first thing is that we don't understand pleasure. That's the first thing. So what is pleasure? What we define as pleasure is your sense, is what comes from within that drives you into some consumption. So for instance, hunger is an expression of pleasure. So if you find that you are hungry and you have a desire to eat a specific thing, we're saying that you are driven by pleasure to eat that specific thing. Now, when your body is in a state of pleasure, there's a magical process that takes place by which your hormones, your digestive enzymes, the hydrochloric acid within your body, and so on, it's functioning at its highest level. So if I say I have a pleasure to eat ABC, I'm saying my hormones and everything is at the highest level to consume. You think that pleasure is simply there telling you to eat or consume something or to enjoy something. But in actuality, pleasure is saying that I am invoking the power of the spirit to not only digest whatever you're about to consume or process whatever you're about to consume, but transmute it into vital essence that you need for your life success. So if I have a pleasure for a thing, that's what I'm saying, that my body is in a position to receive that, to transmute that, to turn it into vitality, turn it into vital essence. So for instance, if I manifest the hunger and the desire to eat kale greens, in other words, if I say to myself, hey, I would love to have a kale green salad at this particular moment, then what I'm saying is my body is in a position to fully maximize and extract the nutrients from kale into my body and turn it into vital essence. Now, the same can be said about anything, no matter if it has vitality or not. So you can say the same thing about potato chips. You can say the same thing about French fries, fried chicken, or whatever. Even though those particular objects don't have a lot of vitality, whatever the vitality is, your body is going to process it. Your body is going to transmute it to whatever vital essence it may manifest. Now, pleasure manifests in two ways. According to the Mahasaya, we teach that pleasure manifests in two ways. Pleasure in things that increase your vitality and vigor, we utilize the term virtue. And then pleasure in things that once consumed decreased vitality and vigor, we use the term vice. All right? So the English words virtue and vice, we associate with pleasure in things that are known to, once consumed, to increase vitality and vigor. So when people have a misunderstanding of consumption, a misunderstanding of pleasure, they are driven to have pleasure in almost anything. And if that thing is not considered, if its nutritional value is not considered, if its essence, if its impact upon your well-being is not considered, then you are manifesting pleasure in the name of vice. And manifesting pleasure in the name of vice will eventually devitalize you to a point where you're unable to cope with life. See, the major problem in our society right now is that our younger generation, they're unable to cope. They're unable to cope with the stresses of a job. So therefore, that's why they keep losing jobs. They're unable to to cope with the things that society is trying to demand for them. They have very little self-restraint because they don't have the vitality and vigor to manifest self-restraint. That's why they're always complaining and arguing with things, because they don't have the vitality to cope. That's why they have this higher rate of suicide. That's why they have the highest rate of symptoms of anxiety and depression because they don't have the vitality to cope with life. That's the problem. So when we are talking about pleasure, we're also talking about the generation that is the most susceptible to the vehicles of social media and gaming. The places where they learn all these degenerate expressions of pleasure. So as a result, they are sicker, weaker, more docile, unable to manage themselves. So that's why we see all this amoral behavior on the internet, unable to control themselves. And since they're unable to control themselves, they're asking the system to change to support their amoral behavior versus them standing above and growing beyond their immaturity to be successful in society. You see, what we don't understand is that according to the Ma'asah, according to the understanding of Ma'at, that you are born in demand. You are born in what we call gravity, by which you are born in situations that create a demand upon you. See, you have to increase your vitality to meet the demand. See, gravity is a tool used to create a sense of effort. So walking, running, talking, everything that comes at the expense of effort, it feels like it takes an effort to walk. Eventually you'll get tired of walking. Eventually if you run, you get tired because gravity is creating that demand. But guess what? Life has a specific demand for you. And you have to maintain and increase your vitality to meet the demands of your specific life. So if you're being told, if you're being taught, if you're being trained to devitalize yourself in the name of pleasure, then eventually you will not be able to meet the demands of life. Eventually you will not be able to meet the demands of society. Eventually you will not be able to meet the demands of your job. Eventually you will not be able to meet the demands of your relationship. And therefore you will fall in a state of deep dependence and servitude. You may think fighting the police is an expression of resilience, but in actuality, fighting the police is an expression of low vitality. Because ultimately, first we have to get to a place where we can control and self-manage ourselves before we fight the police. But we cannot fight the police if we still are in a position where we need the police to manage us because we don't have a vitality within ourselves for self-agency, self-control, self-management. That is how you get rid of the police department. So we have to come to understand this concept of pleasure, how to execute pleasure, find ourselves doing virtuous pleasure, find ourselves doing virtuous exercises, find ourselves doing virtuous breathing exercises so that we know that pleasure is very important to us. See, in Thesut 3, we use the word enthusiasm. And of course, enthusiasm is Greek for being possessed by God. How do you know somebody is being possessed by God? Because they have the vitality and vigor to meet the demands of life. That's how you know somebody's being possessed by God, because they're in power. See, the concept of enthusiasm is saying that you should have a high level of enthusiasm in vitality and vigor. And once you know that vitality and vigor is executed through your pleasure, right? But see, no, you have more enthusiasm for pleasure and the things of pleasure. We call in ancient Kemet wabu, without at the decrease of your vitality. No, you should have the enthusiasm for your vitality should come first, and how you parcel that out is determined through your practices of pleasure. If you knew that every time you indulge in pleasure, you would lose 10% of your vitality, which means you'd be more susceptible to illness and things of that nature, you would adjust to ensure that your gas tank was at a certain level. You wouldn't go around putting masks on to protect you. You would increase your vitality to deal with whatever's coming your way. But you're not being trained to have an enthusiasm for your vitality and vigor. You're being trained to have more enthusiasm for the things that you consume. So more sex, more inappropriate sex is good, right? And since you got social media now, since you got Amazon, since you got, all these things that can almost deliver vice to you, you just fall into the abyss of uncontrolled vice in the name of pleasure, in the name of enjoyment, in the name of having fun. As you get sicker, as your family gets sicker, as your seed gets sicker, they become more dependent upon the system. Imagine fighting somebody that is also feeding you. Let me say that again. Imagine fighting somebody that also has to feed you. Does that sound ridiculous? Well, that is exactly what we're doing now in society. And the only reason you would put yourself in that position is because your vitality is low. When your vitality is low, you're susceptible to all things, including disease, sickness, famine, wars, rumors of wars, and all those things that are spoken upon in Revelations. The Misused philosophy is here to give you self-agency. And one of those applications of self-agency is your commitment to maintaining and increasing your vitality. If you want to play a vital role in society, one of those vital roles is you maintain your vitality and vigor through how you execute your consumption practices, through how you execute pleasure. That takes pressure off of the community you're functioning through. You see, in ancient Kemet, in the Misused philosophy, we have a term for the life force. It's called way. The life force is a part of our philosophy. Maintaining your vitality and vigor is a part of our philosophy. The two major nations right now is China and India. China has Tai Chi, Qigong, just to name a few. India has yoga. So we must have an enthusiasm for our vitality and vigor. Ultimately, you want to treat your vitality and vigor like money. Your life has bills just like you have bills. Your life has demands that are necessary to meet with a certain level of vitality. Once your vitality drops to a certain level, you are unable to maintain your ability to succeed. And therefore, you are in need of others supporting you in that regard. So as we build towards the Misused society, one of the aspects that we're attempting to build is self-agency in vitality and vigor. The more you have the vital essence strong within you, the less you are dependent upon the systems outside of you. And freedom is essentially based upon, one of the platforms of freedom is maintaining your health, your wellness, your power, your ability to endure, your ability to overcome, your ability to endure, transcend, and stand in empowerment. And that's fundamentally based upon your idea and understanding of the vital essence within you. The same vital essence that can bring a child into the world. I'm going to leave you with this. The body's ability to take a potato chip, to take a kale green, to take fried chicken, whatever else you eat, process it and turn it into vital essence necessary for the blood, is something that science is still unable to do with all of its technology. Even with the Human Genome Project completed, they still don't know, they still don't have the means of creating blood. The body is able to process what you're eating, no matter what it is, no matter how little essence it has, but it's able to take what you have and turn it into the essence within blood. Science has synthetic blood, but they still do not have synthetic blood that humans can use. Why is that? Because there's a magical process that takes place when we consume, and the body is amped up to process what we're consuming. That's what we mean by pleasure. That's the purpose of pleasure, is to indulge, consume, and turn that into essence that the body can use to move forward in success and power. But that's going to take a paradigm shift in all of us. And that's why the Masa is here, to help you with transitioning into that paradigm that's going to make you successful, make your community successful. So there's no need for others to take care of that for us. Thus, the end of racism.